Hi, welcome everyone. I can see most of you are starting to joining right now. So keep joining, keep joining. We're about to start in the next 5 minutes. It's going to be an exciting time this afternoon. So keep joining, keep joining, keep joining, keep joining. As we start, I'm going to put a poll so that we're able to see where all of you are joining us from, and then I'll be able to give the results much later. Keep joining, keep joining, keep joining. It's wonderful to see you on as we wait for others to join in. And as the poll is ongoing, I'll just start by introducing the webinar and welcoming you all on board. This is an initiative done by ABMC International. And this afternoon, we want to just give you an opportunity to share, learn from our experts, and also be able to learn from your side in terms of what is happening and how best we can be able to manage through this kind of pandemic that we are in. As we proceed, I have my facilitators currently available. I have Dixon Ojuku, who will be moderating this particular session. I'll just give a brief insight about who he is and his role for this particular webinar. And we'll also be having Lunice Johnston from South Africa. She's an expert in the area of communication and public relation, and who will be sharing her insights in terms of what this seminar is all about, or this webinar is all about. So as we go on, I would give a few insights. I'll end this poll for now, just to give, it was there to give us an indication of where we are all joining in. I'll share the results as we proceed, so that I can just give a few snippets about this particular webinar. So ABMC is an institute of learning and development based in Nairobi, Kenya. Currently we have offices in Kampala, Uganda, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Our HQ is in Nairobi, Kenya. We've been in the business since 2012 doing learning and development, mostly research-based, and this is one of the areas where we thrive in, and we giving you this opportunity is also another area of learning through the digital transformation which we are finding ourselves in. So the webinar here today is on, if I can just jump quickly, on managing communication or public relations during crisis. And we'll have some of the topics being discussed, which will be more. So with those few remarks, mine is to introduce to you my moderator for today. He's called Dr. Dixon Ojuku. Dr. Dixon Ojuku is part and parcel of ABMC. He's based in Liverpool in UK. He has a wealth of experience. He's a research professional and a performance coach in the learning and development industry. He's been working across the African region, the Middle East, and now he's currently based in the United Kingdom. So over to you, Dixon.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. And I'm glad to have you. I would like to share your screen. Joseph, I want to, yeah, okay. Let's go and look at something quickly. I think the first place I would like to start is how we got here. You know, that's an important question I would like to ask ourselves. You know, 6 months ago, If anybody told you that you're going to be sitting in the house by now, not going to work restricted, and then no flights, nations, you wouldn't believe it. You would think, no, you must be joking. But today the reality is in front of us. Many people are taking on our ways as a result of the current pandemic, and it has impacted organizations and individuals, at the same time. And now what we are having currently is that there's fear, there's unforeseen needs, both for the organization and the individual as a result of the pandemic. Actually, some people say that the cause of the pandemic is human. Some of them say, no, it's not human. Some of them even say it's spiritual. But again, there's a lot of those conspiracy theories that we are having today in circulation. But our time today is not going to be based on any of these things. We're going to be focusing on communication, PR, in the pandemic and crisis. And like I rightly said, I started, if you ask me what is the current reality is, we have fear, we have anxieties. Some people are having job loss and that's job cuts. There are some forced vacation by organization, need for relevantness for many organizations, and that's committing to work. People are working from home now. Some organizations don't even have a guideline to manage situations of this nature. And then the most important thing is that there's a need for right information. People from different sources, from the TV, from the social media, from all kinds of sources. And that's why today it's important for us to look at the communication and PR in the time of crisis. I am not the expert to handle or take you through today. My role is just to direct. But I would like to introduce our speaker for today. And Joseph has already started mentioning her name. She is Lunis Johnson, who is the founder of Lunis Johnson Communication, based in South Africa. She has decided to take the plunge and own her own reputation management business after gathering experience for many years, up to 25 years, working in various public relations and communication and management agencies. Lunis' scope of experience includes managing public relations, and also media liaison, crisis management, social media, reputation management, and then also stakeholder management and facilitating workshops and seminars, of which this is one of them. During the past 10 years, he has had a wide range of companies that have benefited from her versatile experience in communication and media. I think that this afternoon, we are going to have a brilliant time with Lunis as she takes us through the topic for the day, which is communication and PR in time of crisis and pandemic. Let's welcome Lunis. Lunis, is over to you. Okay, you are mute.
Joseph, can you unmute? I'm unmuted. Perfect. So thank you so much, Dixon, for the introduction. And Joseph, thank you again for you and your team for making this platform available for us to share what I believe is valuable information for the delegates. I just want to share my screen. There we go. And then also thank you to everybody that is attending this afternoon. I'm sure, as Joseph and Dixon and I spoke before, is that nowadays everybody's on webinars or Zoom, and that you cannot assume that people will have time because there's just so many of these webinars and things scheduled. So thank you so much for your time. So I'm sure that during the course of the last 2 or 3 months, we've all come across this sign to say we closed, either through what we read in newspapers that certain businesses are closed, or our own organizations, our own companies that are closed. And business as we know it, organizations as we know it, has changed dramatically. And I think a few of us, if any of us, has ever faced a pandemic or a crisis of this nature before. So the way that we're going to interact with one another, the way that organizations are going to adapt is really going to change. And we can already see how companies and organizations are adapting. And I mean, in our pre-webinar conversation, we said that we don't know when this thing's going to end. And from a comms perspective, we really need to be aware of what's happening, and that this goalpost is moving constantly. And for us as communicators, we need to equip ourselves and empower ourselves with knowledge. And that's why it's appreciated that you join us in this webinar. So managing a crisis is really not rocket science. And it can often be that managing the crisis becomes the crisis and not necessarily the crisis. And that's why it's important that we are prepared. And hopefully the session today will enable you to take away some nuggets that you can actually go and prepare. And we as communication specialists, this is now our time to really draw the line in the sand, to stake our claim and to say, please take us serious. But we can only do that if we equip ourselves with the necessary requirement. So the COVID-19 really came completely unexpected. I mean, who would have thought 2 months ago that many of us in our countries would be on total lockdown or some form of lockdown? And we always thought that it's going to be a far-off thing, that it's happening in the East and it won't come to us. And then it is. And it's almost like we went to sleep the one night in utopia and we woke up the next morning and it was complete chaos, so to say. But we don't have to have chaos if we manage it correctly. So when we look at COVID-19 and from a case study perspective, and I really hope that there are some business schools out there that could really start putting together some case studies. Although this is a moving target, and that you will never complete the case study until there is a vaccine, I think, of how people are managing, how companies and organizations are coping. And we really need to look at this pandemic and managing this crisis from two perspectives, I think. The one perspective is really from the pandemic's perspective. In other words, this is a world crisis that has hit everybody. There's nobody, no country, no person that has got immunity. And from that perspective, it's the World Health Organization and how have they dealt with this crisis. But then the next layer is also how are countries, companies, and organizations, and even individuals handling and managing this crisis. Because as I said, it's not that we woke up, and I mean, it is literally that we went to bed the one night and the next morning we woke up and we were surrounded by this pandemic. So the crisis from the pandemic point of view is also, we can look at how different countries responded to it. Some countries and their leaders, actually, some of them are still in denial, like Belarus. They continue life as normal. Other countries like France and Italy, they went to an early lockdown, and despite that lockdown, they've still got some very high infected rate. So I don't think that there is a blueprint to manage this crisis and to say, okay, for the world, this is what we're going to do, because every country, every organization is different. And that's why we need to prepare ourselves. If we look at the way that the pandemic has been handled from a global perspective, first of all, there was an engagement with all in framing the crisis and identify the patterns of how this started and how it was controlled. And when you look at your own organization, you will see that there are actually 5 of these steps that one can take. If you look at your own organization, you can actually take these 5 steps and also implement it in your organization. So first of all is identify patterns. And we know in some countries they wanted to flatten the curve. In others, it was just to lock down the elderly people and people with low immunity. Then we enter the stage of, or the phase of exploring, where we generously shared information. And that's one of the big things and one of the big positive things when it comes to COVID-19 and the whole communication around it, is the generous sharing of information. South Africa, my home country, has just been praised by the World Health Organization on how we are dealing with this crisis and with this pandemic. And it is really about our president taking charge, The Minister of Health is sharing information. And yes, there are criticisms that the department is not sharing enough information, or there's too many bureaucracy involved in sharing information. But you'll understand that in a pandemic of this nature, and we'll talk about it a bit later, that one needs to have a central base of information sharing. Otherwise, the information can just run away with you. So you need to explore, and you can only explore if there's a generous information sharing. The next one phase is also to explain what has been decided, how are we going to contain this situation. It doesn't have to be the COVID, but in your own organization, in years from now, and you have a crisis, have to explain what has been decided, how will it work, and then commit to action. So once I've got my action plan and explain what has been decided, how am I going to resolve this crisis, I need to explain how I'm going to do it, and then I need to commit to action. I think that's also one of the criticisms of plans and of comms people, is that, you know, we sometimes have these wonderful plans, but then when it comes to implementation, we want somebody else to implement, and that's when we get that's where we get criticism from. Then it's also about the execution and the constant monitoring. And the thing with a crisis and a crisis plan is that it needs to be flexible. You cannot, at the beginning of a crisis, say, okay, this is our plan and this is how we're going to execute upon it. You need to constantly evaluate and constantly go back and make sure that you're still reaching the right target audience. Maybe your target audience is now different in the middle of the crisis than in the beginning of the crisis. You might want to use different platforms. I mean, in the traditional sense,
we lost you there, Lunice. Perhaps it's the connection.
You'll identify maybe in the beginning of the crisis that WhatsApp messages was fine to communicate to your stakeholders, but throughout and now in the middle, you may have to change your platform. So it's quite important that you execute and then constantly monitor. And then it's also the evaluation. There's no need and there's no benefit in having a crisis plan if you cannot evaluate, because from the evaluation you learn and you adapt your efforts. So these are thought from a global perspective and from managing the COVID-19 pandemic, that these 5 phases are actually very handy in helping you to manage the crisis in your own organization. And very sadly, within this pandemic, I think it's an excellent opportunity for some leaders to come to the fore and to stand up and to show up and to say, but I can take the bull by the horns. And I think there's a couple of world leaders of quite influential countries, if we think about them, that we think, no, but you are not doing your people justice. Just by how you're chopping and changing your messages, how you're not communicating effectively, how there is no empathy in the way that you communicate. And then there's other leaders, like our own President Ramaphosa, even the Prime Minister of New Zealand, that really showcase that there are leaders in leading their people in the time of the pandemic. So I just thought, you know, that PwC, the 3 waves of how to develop the COVID-19 crisis response is also handy, in that the first wave is really the immediate term. So that's where you mobilize your the workforce and establish response restructure. So it's really immediately, how did you react to that? And I think if you look back at how did you respond and how did you manage this crisis, that you can use this template to say, okay, wave 1, how did I did my crisis and how did we manage this crisis? And then the second wave is really the medium term. So this is where it's more of a stabilized position, where you develop tactical response to the challenges of navigating the COVID-19, the new normal, because we have to face it. Life as we knew it pre-COVID-19 is not going to be the same. And there will definitely be adjustments made. Many of us has kicked against the fact that we need to be online, we have to have webinars, we need to have Zoom meetings before it was necessary. Now it's necessary. We cannot not work, and we cannot not for an organization to continue with its workings. So we had to adapt. So the new normal is going to look different than the normal that we used to. And then the long-term wave is really strategize and design a strategy for emerging stronger post-COVID-19 economy. And you can't wait for the pandemic to finish for you to actually start to look at how are you going to take your organization forward. Because if you do that, then you will have another crisis on your hand, because then the crisis will be self-inflicted, because then you didn't look after your organization in the pandemic to see how we're going to come out of it. One of the major things, and this is the second lesson I want you to take away from today, is that during a crisis, it's so important that we need to be firm, factual, and fast. And what I mean by firm is that once a decision is made, and it is an informed decision based on scientific evidence, based on evidence and on research and on advice from advisors that you can trust and rely, you need to stick to that. You cannot chop and change. I mean, if I just go back to the example of Donald Trump, where in the beginning he said, no, but this is just a bad case of flu. Now he actually understands the enormity and the impact of the pandemic. In the beginning, he was praising China. Now he's blaming China. So you can see how the inconsistency of managing the crisis is really not doing him any good. So we need to be firm in our decisions, but we also need to make room within our plan to be flexible and adjust, because it, as I said on many occasions, that this is a moving target. The second thing that we need to remember is just to be factual. And I think that is what really differentiates the good communicators from the not so good communicators, is that we cannot allow for misinformation, for fake news to dictate to us how we're going to manage this crisis. We have to have facts. And there's lots of research out there. I mean, I watched a very interesting documentary. I think many of you may have seen it, Pandemic. And then on Sky, they actually interviewed the person that narrated and that actually commissioned the movie. And he again said that this virus is not man-made. It cannot have been created in a lab. And I know that there are stories that goes around to say, but maybe it was lab-made. And once I listened to that person, I immediately realized that I will trust him rather than some of the other fake news that's out there. So it's important to be factual, and it's also important to be fast. If you go back to the case study of COVID-19 and how the pandemic has been handled worldwide, I think many companies and organizations and countries can actually say, but we haven't acted fast enough. Many people still think, and there's even some people in developed countries who still think that this is a hoax, that it's not happening, that it's a conspiracy. And that is because people and organizations and companies and countries have not acted fast enough. In a crisis, there's no time to put on your lipstick and to put on your jacket and your tie. You have to act fast. You have to have that there is no time because it is a matter of life and death. So when you go and you develop your crisis plans, or when you're in your crisis and you sit with your crisis team, you have to ask these three things. Have we been firm? Have we been factual? And have we been fast? I suppose when you're in the crisis, like we are in the pandemic now, people will argue that it's a bit late to do some scenario planning. And I will counter that to say, but you have to do scenario planning moving forward. What is your organization going to look like in a year's time? How will you conduct your business? What is the scenario? Because you cannot ignore this. You cannot have an ostrich in the sand approach when it comes to things like that. And yes, we won't have, I mean, next year, this time, your organization or company might have a different crisis. And hopefully in 18 months, 24 months time, the scientists would have developed a vaccine. So then we will be confronted with another crisis. So in times of normality, and I use that term very lightly, you and your management team and leadership team needs to go and sit, and you need to go and unpack what are the most likely scenarios that can happen in our organization? And yes, in an ideal world, everybody would have had a crisis plan based on their scenario planning, but that is just in the ideal world. And that's why I think many of us has learned a lesson during this time that we have to have a scenario planning. And yes, people can say, but what about the black swan? COVID-19 is a black swan. The fall in the financial markets was a black swan. The fall in the oil price is a black swan situation, because it is just so unpredictable. But if you then look at Bill Gates, that spoke at the TEDx in 2015, he actually already then started talking about the fact that we might get a pandemic of this nature, and what did we do to counter that. So the other thing about scenario planning is you can't just have it on a piece of paper. You also then need to go and do some exercises. So in your own organization, you need to go and sit and think, but what is the most likely scenario that could impact on our business? What is the crisis? I mean, if I just think about ABMC and Joseph and his team, I mean, if they didn't do proper planning, they would not have had a business to go back to. And they realized that they need to go online. They realized they need to do webinars in order for them to sustain their business. And that's what they did. So they did some, maybe they didn't know it at the time, but they did know they did do some scenario planning, because that will build strong foundation, and that will also use for successful outcomes after the crisis. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can see that the consequences, if you do not manage a crisis, is just monumental. And it all boils down to your reputation. And even now with this COVID-19, you can see that it was a loss of income, business shut down, impact on service delivery. There's just so many of these consequences that we can actually adapt today to what is happening with COVID-19. And do know that if you do not manage the crisis, that there will be consequences for you to face. So if we look at the levels of crisis, unfortunately and sadly, we are now on high alert. We're DEFCON 1. And DEFCON, just out of interest, is really an American terminology that the military in America uses to identify the levels of them going to war and to be ready for war or combat. And DEFCON 5 is really operate as normal. So there's nothing untoward in the organization. It's just day-to-day running of the business. But the moment that you realize that something is happening in the organization, for instance, if you've got a customer that is complaining and you do not manage that complaint that has been given to your call center, it can escalate. And I mean, in South Africa, we had an example where somebody with one of the mobile operators complained, nobody listened to this complaint, and it escalated to the fact that this complainant actually had a big billboard, a very prominent billboard, with the salesperson's contact details. So you can see how it escalated because people just didn't think that it is worthy for them to act when there's DEFCON 5, so operate as normal. So it's important for us as communicators to understand the level of crisis and where we come into and how we're going to manage it. Because if we don't manage it at the one level, it will escalate to the next level. And then if it is a high alert, then it's really, we need to pull out all stops. So one of the practical things I thought of including in today's webinar is really to have a crisis communication checklist. And this presentation will be available. You can actually print this out and put it next to your laptop and make sure that, when you're in a crisis or when you prepare for a crisis, that you tick off and make sure that you're still on the right track. And the another lesson, I think lesson 3 that I want us to take away from today is really that the crisis plan should not be in file 13 and only be dusted off when there's a crisis. We know it happened with BP many years ago when they had the big oil spill. Nobody could find the crisis plan. It was somewhere there, but nobody could find it. And that's why it was such a disaster. Your crisis plan should be continuously looked at, evaluated, and changed and adapt to the changes in the organization, the changes in the environment, the changes in environment. I talk about the physical environment, but also the business environment. So first of all, we really need to have a crisis management plan, and I'll talk about it a bit in more detail. But then the second part of this is really to have an effective crisis management team. And for this team to be effective, you have to have the right people. And please, I really want to stress today is that the right people is not necessarily the MD and the CEO or the head of the department, the head of the organization. The right people are good communicators who really understand the seriousness of the situation. You cannot have somebody on your crisis management team who still thinks that COVID-19 is a hoax, or that it is a conspiracy, and that they're not serious about the situation. So please choose the right people, and you will know in your own organization who is the right people that needs to be on that crisis management team. The right people also needs to be people, I mean, if it is an HR related issue, then you need to have HR or somebody from HR in your crisis management team. I think often organizations are being criticized, and fairly criticized, because they've got a crisis management team, but they don't know what's going on because it's the wrong people on the team that's managing the crisis at that specific point. And also your crisis management team needs to be flexible, because things changes. In the beginning, you might just have a focus on your employees. Further down the line, you might have to look at other stakeholders. So you need to bring in other people that can look at those stakeholders. So your crisis management team also needs to be flexible. It's important for the team to be set up in a war room. Now, I know in times like we're in now that a physical war room of bricks and mortar is not possible. But then you need to set them up and make sure that every day at a certain time, or when there needs to be quick communication, that this war room is set up. And we need to ensure that there's connectivity, that we all got phones, laptops, stationery, and all of that, and that we are kept up to date with the correct information. When you are in a crisis, please make sure that your mobile phone is always charged, is always on, not on silent, and that your laptop is the same. Because you cannot be running around managing the crisis and then all of a sudden your mobile phone dies. And then you actually create a crisis for yourself because you didn't make sure that your tools were working. Also important when managing the crisis is really adequately trained spokespeople. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the CEO or the MD, but it has to be somebody that has got empathy for the situation, that can clearly communicate, that can talk in short sentences, that doesn't waffle, that understands the enormity of the situation, and that you feel confident will actually be able to speak with one voice. I think one of the big criticisms that we as South Africa has got is that our president is really leading from the front, but then some of his ministers are letting him down with the way they communicate certain things, and that they're not always singing off the same hymn sheet. In the crisis, you really need to keep your employees informed and keep them connected, because these are really unprecedented times. I mean, how many times have you actually just sat by yourself and think, no, this is too much. The anxiety levels are just too much. So you need to make sure that your employees are informed and that they stay connected, because you can then manage that anxiety levels. And yes, the communication is not always going to be rosy. And you cannot tell them that there will be a vaccine at September, or we're going to open up business and it's going to be business as usual, when you know it's not. So that communication to your employees needs to be authentic and really needs to come from the heart. And you need to provide them with regular updates. And then open and frequent communication. I think that's one of the big pluses for organizations that really comes through this pandemic, is the openness of the communication and the frequency of communication. Don't communicate just once a week, even if you have to communicate twice or 3 times in a day, especially with updated information. Yes, you might stand the chance of people losing interest in you and not even reading your emails or your WhatsApp messages because it is just a continuation or repeat of old messages. That's why you need to keep frequent communication and current information that you share with them. Even in the beginning, if you share tips on how to keep safe. I mean, in the beginning, everybody said, no, you don't have to wear a mask. Now you need to wear a mask. So now the information is, okay, how am I going to inform my employees what is the correct use of a mask, depending on which country you are. And I mean, if you, in certain countries, they say it's not necessary to use a mask. But I can remember right at the beginning, I received emails and communication from all stakeholders involved in my life, from my landlord to my finance guy, to my tax guy, to my medical aid. Everybody was sending me things to say, you know, they as a business are open. They might just move online, but they're still open for business. And it made me feel safe because I know that they were taking care of me. So not just from an employee perspective, but make sure that there's open and frequent communication. And then important, foster an environment of collaboration and ensure team can work remotely. I think many organizations and leadership has actually learned in this time and discovered in this time that their organization wasn't geared in the beginning to work offline. And that now, and after a big scramble, they realized that they need people to be connected. They need people to have data, whether it is fiber or dongles or however way they use it, but people need to be connected. So in a crisis team, and you as a comms person, you must make sure that issue and that aspect is being addressed so that leadership and the management can understand. But they cannot send people home if they don't have connectivity, if they don't have data, if they don't have laptops. And if you work off laptops and everybody has got now their own devices, what are the security that you've got? Because the last thing you want is for hackers to hack into your systems and hack some of the sensitive information. And those are the kinds of things that you need to highlight to your IT people to say, have we done some security checks? Are we working off a VPN line? How are we doing our security? Another one is really to answer all the but you know, you're spreading fake news. So what is happening now? And then, so share the latest updates regularly, because that way you empower people with knowledge and you prevent them from spreading misinformation. It's also create a central communication point. It's either the HR or the comms team. And just again, back to South Africa, when the initial phase of communication started, it was done by the Minister of Health. And then all the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. And they actually got a lot of flack. But I thought to myself, but they are handling it correctly, because this way they are preventing fake news or wrong messages or wrong information to come out of what is being communicated. So in your team, make sure that you create a central communication point, because also that person is then the central point, and then the employees or other stakeholders will know that that is their port of call to get any information, any clarity on things that is going wrong or that they need to know of. Please update your employees' contact details. I think many of us, if we go to our employees' contact details now, we'll see, oh, we've got outdated, we didn't update the email address or the phone number. Sometimes people change his phone numbers. I mean, I still have my phone number, the same one that I had in 1998. I just don't like change. But so make sure that you update your employee contact details, and also update your company travel regulations. And make sure that HR is brought into this, because now travel is no longer, you can just get on a plane and you can fly. I was saying to Joseph and Dixon earlier is that I was supposed to be in Mombasa now to present my own company, and because of the travel bans, we've got some travel regulations. And also ensure that your non-connected employees are informed. Not everybody has got access to a smartphone, and make sure then that they are also informed maybe by the old-fashioned text message that you send through to them. And you can see from this checklist It's really not rocket science, as I said before. But sometimes we really need to just get some new information, just to get some update, just to make sure that we are actually on the right track. And here and there might be a nugget that you think, oh, you know, I never thought about updating my employee contact details. I need to update certain things. Maybe I can create a Corona Q&A platform. So from the crisis communication checklist, I would say that these few things to check is the most important if you really want to manage the crisis in an effective manner. So now we come to a very important aspect, and that is really the crisis management communication plan. And that is because immediate action is required. And so this plan, and if you think of the plan in terms of a roadmap, the roadmap and the plan provides structure when dealing with a crisis. If you have your crisis management plan, everybody knows who's doing what are the messages, what are the platforms we're using, when are we using it, why are we communicating, holding statements are being prepared and just updated as and when required with relevant information. So it makes life of the crisis management team so much easier if there's a professional crisis management plan in place. And as I said before, you will have to identify 3-4 scenarios. And even within the COVID-19 situation, you might have different scenarios that's impacting on the business and how you do business. And for each of that scenario, you need to have a crisis management plan. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It is a simple structure, just basically the who, what, why, where, when, and how. And it also ensures then the organization's readiness to handle unforeseen events and emergencies. Again, back to the BP example, if they just had an updated communication or crisis management plan, the crisis of the oil spill, I think, would have been dealt much better. And it's also designed to safeguard the organization's reputation in critical times, because everybody knows what needs to happen. It's been developed in times of calmness, and you can just apply your mind and just do it. The crisis management team, plan is also addresses employee well-being. It looks at your brand reputation, your financial management, supply chain, as well as legal issues. Because in all of this, there are legal issues that you need to take care of. And you need to identify who are your key stakeholders. And in different phases of the crisis, you'll have different stakeholders. But it is important that your employees are part of creating this plan. You also need to know which media to use and what are the key messages. The key messages in the beginning for organizations when they send out notifications to their stakeholders, so to their clients and customers, was to say, but we are on top of this. Yes, we are aware of this crisis, and we no longer bricks and mortar, but we're moving online, but you will still get the service that you require. Now, the key message might be that, how are you doing? Are you taken care of? These are numbers of institutions, organizations that you can actually call if you need some more help. So you can see that your messages and the media that you use, or the medium that you use, actually changes and are flexible. You also need a team to look at the end game and not just focusing on the current crisis, because there is life after COVID-19. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be September, it might not be in 2021, but there's going to be a life after the crisis. And that will happen when we have a vaccine. So you need to have a team to look at the end game, to look at how am I going to conduct my business after the crisis? Am I still going to continue with webinars? Am I still going to have less people physically in the office and more working from home? How is that situation going to be? What are the kinds of things that we're going to look at? So look at the end game, and important, evaluate your plan. See where you've made mistakes. And it's absolutely fine to make mistakes. I think that is one of the big positives if you come out of a crisis and you can actually look at yourself and you say, well, yes, we made mistakes, we admit to these mistakes, and this is how we corrected the mistakes. When we look at a crisis, there's also some essential steps that you as a crisis comms or just as a comms person need to take care of. The first and foremost is really to put your employees' well-being above all else. And in the instance of COVID-19, I mean, the moment that they realized that this is really a big pandemic, they sent people home, made sure that they were safe, made sure that they were taken care of. The leadership team of organizations didn't just say, well, everybody needs to come to work because we need to continue working. So it is really important that we put employees' well-being above all else. We have to communicate promptly, accurately, and transparently. And I think I've spoken about it previous times and highlighted the importance of prompt, accurate, and transparent communication. You have to keep your expenses in check and have a backup for budget deficit. And yes, you as a comms person might sit here and think, well, I'm not finance team, I don't need to look at this. But as the custodian of crisis and crisis management within your organization, you need to make sure that you are keeping the expenses in check and not just make this excuse. I mean, earlier on, Joseph and I spoke, and he mentioned that they had, look at their marketing budget and how they're actually going to make it easier for people to sign up for webinars without having to compromise some of the quality. And you have to look at the expenses, because business as usual is not the way it is going to be for the foreseeable future. You also need to identify and repair the broken links in the supply chain. I think many organizations have realized now that their supply chain, that there are links broken in that supply chain. I spoke to one of my clients earlier on in the process who manufactures mattresses and beds. And that was the beginning of, or the middle of Feb. And he said, no, they're still fine. They're still getting their supply. They can still manufacture the mattresses. Well, we are now in lockdown, so they are closed and they can't produce. But before lockdown, they were actually struggling to get some of the material to make this mattress. So within your own organization, you need to go and look at your supply chain, and you need to go and look at how is this being impacted. Another client of mine is in the coal mine industry, and they have got huge problems with the supply of coal, because they have to take the coal out of the ground. They provide with the energy supplier, but then they also need to export. And in the export at the harbors, they can't take the coal because there's not enough capacity to store. Then, and because there's not, where do they go with this? So there's really a break in the supply chain. And the client also said that this is a moving target. Every day there's something different. Now they can't move the coal to other countries because those countries are in lockdown and they're not allowing any ships into these ports. So you'll find that there's lots of big cargo ships out in the oceans. And what will happen to them? What if they can't go into harbors to unload their load? And also prepare for the unexpected. I think we, after 9/11, we thought, who will take a plane and fly into a building and kill 3,500 people? Now we look at, now we've got the virus that is impacting all of us. And you have to think to yourself, but what is the next unexpected thing that can happen? And we have to prepare ourselves for the unexpected. So these also, I think if you print this out and you put it next to your laptop, it will help you during you having to manage a crisis and make sure that you follow these essential steps. Dixon, are we still okay for time?
We have 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So I just want us to, we don't have to be paralyzed during a crisis. And we have to ask ourselves the following questions in order to get out of the paralysis mode. How will your organization ensure the well-being of your people and the safety of your productive assets? In other words, well-being of your people, will you be sending them home? When they work from home, what are the tools that they have to actually perform their work? How can you ensure your sustainable financing and stable cash reserves? In other words, I need to make sure that if I'm a bricks and mortar business, that I can actually move it off-site and move it online. Are there well-coordinated and standardized communication systems and protocols to clear, transparent communication with all stakeholders? Does your organization have a crisis management team to manage the short-term liquidity impacts? What model do you have in place to assess potential risk and define responses in the event of a crisis? And these are all questions that EY asked, and that they gave their clients in order for them to avoid a situation of crisis paralysis. Also, have you considered the impact of a crisis in the budgeting and business planning processes? I mean, moving forward, if you have to put your budget together for next year, it's definitely going to have an impact. So have you considered that? When a crisis has significant financial impact, how can you adapt your business model to reduce cost, both in the short term and the medium term? And I think another lesson for us, just or a highlight or red light that needs to flicker all the time, is the fact that it's no longer business as usual. And we as the comms team need to make sure that management also understands that there are certain things that needs to be addressed in order for us not to have crisis paralysis. How will demand disruption impact you, and how will you recover it from this aftermath? Have you defined supply chain? I think we spoke about that. And is your business model resilient enough to recover from the impact of a crisis? And I think there's many businesses, and we need to be honest with one another. There are many businesses that's not going to survive this COVID-19 pandemic. There are new businesses that might come to the fore that will, and there might be existing businesses that will survive. But we cannot think again that it's going to be business as usual. So if you ask yourself these 10 tough questions, you will rule out the crisis paralysis. And some of them are not easy to answer. Some of them you really need to take some time, workshop it with your team in order to come to the answers. The value of good communication is that, you know, you can't have an information vacuum. Again, you need to be clear, honest, prompt, and transparent communication. There needs to be ongoing support for stakeholders. So once a week, have you sent a note or email or some kind of notification to stakeholders checking in how they're doing? I phone my clients once a week to just check in to make sure that they're still fine. When you know that there's negotiations for new contracts that's coming up, negotiate, especially also if those contractual obligations won't be met. Please put personal feelings aside. You have to strike the right balance. You cannot lead the comms and the crisis team if you feel like this whole thing is a hoax or it's not happening. And it's okay to change your mind. I think we spoke about it earlier, where, you know, it's okay to change your mind, but then, because it is worse to pretend to have all the answers. But when you change your mind with the facts and with scientific evidence. And communicating even if you don't have the decision. So we are evaluating, or decisions are being made, is much better than to say or to have no communication. And if you can tell your audience when to expect a decision, even better. And you don't always have to tell the detail, but if your audience, if your employees and your stakeholders know about the process, then they will trust you that at the end of the day, you will come to a conclusion. So you don't have to tell them all the detail, but it's better than to communicate, not to communicate at all. We also need to communicate sensitively during a crisis. Instead of saying that, you know, and you need to consider the influence of negative phrasing. Instead of say, don't forget to, rather something positive, remember to. So don't forget to wash your hands, but rather remember to wash your hands. Those positive words. Show empathy all the time. Refrain from, sorry for a spelling mistake, refrain from sharing your opinion or beliefs regarding the pandemic. Rather share info from reliable sources. If your company is not able to access emails, let your customers and clients know how to get in touch with you via, for instance, social media platforms. So don't just, because you're not communicating and you don't have access to emails or your website is not working for some reason, make sure that your clients and customers know that that they can access you through your social media platform. And then also humility in all of this is a very valuable personal trait. We spoke about the evaluation of the crisis comms plan. I won't go into too much detail, but it is important that throughout this process that we constantly evaluate the crisis plan. The touch points, very important. So when you do your planning, your scenario planning, unpack all the possible touch points in your organization that will have an impact on your organization and that you need to communicate with. Social media during a crisis nowadays, I mean, people keep referring back to 1918 with the Spanish flu. Then we didn't, back in the day, there was no social media. So don't bombard the social media platforms with constant updates, but rather use the account to share promotions, behind the scenes look at how your business is adapting, and share local information and keep your community informed. Use social media platform to remind people to sign up for your newsletter, because the newsletter is also a way for them to get some information to stay up to date. Keep messages factual and to the point, and urge the customers to comply with the lockdown rules, whatever they are, and to maintain good levels. So use your social media platform to actually communicate and to contribute to a sense of community. And the one thing, what I learned from managing crisis, and quite a hairy crisis a couple of years ago, is that don't go and look at your own social media platforms, because you will get criticism on how you manage this, how you manage the situation, and that will just deflate you. Rather get an agency to monitor your social media platforms, and when there's something negative, don't respond to every negative comment made, but look at the trend and issue a statement, put the statement on your social media platforms, and leave it at that. You do not enter into arguments, and you do not harass people on your social media platforms. In times like this, your social media platform should really be a communication sharing point. Guidelines for dealing with the media. I think many of us will know how to deal with the media in times of a crisis, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. It is in the presentation, but it is really important that you have a media policy that deals with a crisis specifically, and that you stick to the facts, and that you always speak clearly. You know what your subject are. You are prepared. And it is okay to cry, but please don't lie. I think many organizations, many countries, I mean, this is the picture here is the Italian Prime Minister. He just broke down and he cried. And I think people are more forgiving if you cry than to actually lie. And then how are you going to come back from that? So dealing with the media, it's almost a completely different topic. That one needs to spend some time on, but it's open and fair. And no comment is also not advisable, never. If we just look at a couple of brands that I thought really survived and came out of this pandemic, is organizations like the South African Tourism, who put positive messages out there in terms of giving hope to people. Because I think in times like this, your brand can really be a custodian of the message of hope. Volkswagen put out, thanks for keeping your social distance. The Stel actually manufactured some hand sanitizers. And I'm sure that in your own country, wherever you are, you will come up with your own brands that has really stood up and showcased their mettle. And in a time like this, you cannot not advertise, you cannot not communicate, but it is how you communicate that is important. Because in the end of the day, you as an organization, as a company, as a country, you need to protect your reputation through all of this. And in closing, I think we will all be stronger together. And as comms people, as crisis comms people, we just need to claim our mark, make sure we are prepared, and we just have to stay strong in ourselves. And we need to take care of ourselves in order for us to take care of the team around us. And that's me. Thank you, Dixon.
Thank you so much, Lennis, for that beautiful presentation. And I believe fans have enjoyed the session with us. And I think it's time for us to get into a Q&A questions. I want to start with asking the participants to type on the chat how many of you that have a communication plan in your organization for crisis period, a communication plan during pandemic? Can you type yes or no? Let's see. How many of your organization have a communication plan during a pandemic or crisis period, especially for these COVID-19? Just go to the chat and say yes if you have it and no if you don't have it. Okay, there's a poll here. Let's go now. We're looking at it. Quickly click on a yes or no, and let's see what is the correct for many of the organizations today. All right, 10 more seconds. We'll end the poll in next 10 seconds. Right, Joe, do you have any result? Oh, great. So we have like, Lonis, can you see that we have 67% that don't have any communication plan during the pandemic or crisis period, and we only have 33. And that tells us that this is a key area of a challenge for a lot of organizations. I'm glad that you had very relevant information with us today. Lunis, thank you so much for that. One of the questions that I have here is how do organizations safeguard its employees from fake news and unreliable news sources? I think the major challenge for a lot of our employees at a time like this is that they don't know where social media is telling them something else. The news media is telling them something else. Some organizations are saying something else, or they're not even saying anything at all. So how do we safeguard employees from fake news and news coming from unreliable sources? Over to you, Lunis. Any idea?
Thanks, Dixon. And yes, that is a very valuable question. And I think that's where we as organizations play a very important and prominent role in disseminating information from platforms that are reliable. Right in the beginning, when we were confronted with the pandemic, I actually made a rule for myself to say, I'm gonna limit my engagement on Twitter to only a few hours per day, morning and in the evening. And I'm also just going to access information from the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, our own Minister of Health and Department of Health, as well as the World Health Organization, because they are reputed, they are respected organizations, and that's where I get my information from. So as an organization, I mean, you cannot say to people, you cannot access Twitter, you cannot access other news sites. But as an organization, you can mitigate against the spread of false news or fake news if you put out regular updates, regular comments, regular information that comes through. I mean, right in the beginning, also our Department of Communication requested all organizations that has got a domain.co.za to actually put on the website either a link to the COVID-19 special website, or just have a note to say we support the government's actions and that they can go to this website. So whenever you click on .co.za websites, you will see that there is some form of that communication. And I think that really helps for organizations to mitigate against the spread of fake news. Just back to the poll, I mean, it is quite interesting and scary to think that 67% of organizations in this time don't have a crisis management plan. And I think it's also to do with the fact that we never envisaged this crisis to happen, and that we never envisaged a crisis to happen. But I think this is a very good example of how unpredictable the world can be, and that we have to be prepared.
Great. Thank you so much, Lenis. That's some good question from Felicia Kamal. He said, as we all work towards sharing the right communication with our employees, how do we manage our customers? We have recently had to close down a section of our business, and we will need our customers when we resume. How do we ensure a smooth transition from our customers through proper communication?
Yes, and I want to answer that question by hand of an example. And Joseph, I hope you don't mind using your organization as an example. So what ABMC International did is that right in the beginning, they already started now with webinars. They took, and I mean, their business is in the business of training and workshops and seminars. I mean, that's their business. But they took the business and they did it offline. So for me as a facilitator and for me maybe as a customer or a client, I have got confidence that they will continue with their work. So what to answer the question then more directly is that you have to showcase to your customers. Yes, you had to close down one part of your business, but what value have you added in this time of lockdown? Have you created an additional platform where they can access some information? Have you created a portal? I mean, I don't know what business this is, but have you created a portal where people can actually come and get some information pertaining to your industry, to your organization, to the pandemic? And just constantly, maybe once a week, send out a notification or send out an email or some newsletter to the customers to say, you know, we might have to close this section of the business, but we still continue in other parts, and that's how I communicate. And I think if we've got open and honest communication on a regular basis with all our stakeholders, they will come back to us. Because, I mean, in the instance of ABMC, I'm sure people will realize that they're not just there because these webinars are for free. And so they're not just there to take people's money, but they're also there to add value in terms of the content that they provide. And, you know, many people say, well, I'm a hairdresser. Sorry, Dixon, it's a long answer. But for instance, hairdressers will say, but, you know, I need to have my salon open. I throw it back at them and say, but have you thought about extra value adds? Have you thought about putting up a blog to say to people, how can you take care of your hair at home? How can you, and maybe not even have hair specific information, but just have something to do with your personal appearance. So people should stop thinking that this crisis is going to hamper them and rather see how they can open up opportunities for themselves.
Thank you so much, Lennis. I think that's great. I think the secret, or what I can hear you say, is communication, communication, communication. Carry them along so that they know where you are moving to and what value proposition you have for them. I think for me, one other thing I picked up from there that it's an opportunity to contribute to humanity. The time necessarily for organization to drive revenue or get money out of their customers. It's a time to show what are your organization doing to support government efforts, to support the society, to contribute to the pandemic, because it's a big problem for everybody. So a lot of organizations are now going out responsibility work, trying to reach out and give back to the community. Customers will connect with such organizations that have the kind of feeling for humanity as part of their agenda. And then that also takes me to another question. After this, we are also likely going to open the question and answers. And so once we see raised up, you want to ask a question personally, or you want to make a contribution, we give you an opportunity to do. What I have for you, Lennis, is in what ways is organization driving a balance between organization public relation, employee wellness, and organization performance and survival? Three things: PR of the organization, their employee wellness, and the organization's survival effort. How do we balance these three at the time like this?
Yes, it is quite a tricky question because different people will have different answers. My advice always to my clients and to people that I consult to is that humanity first. And your employees are your most important asset in any organization. And I think many people have realized it now with, if I just go back to the South African environment and where we have now been in lockdown for almost 5 weeks, and many people say open up the economy because people are dying of hunger. And then there's the counter argument to say, but people, we are in a community where we will look after one another. You won't die of hunger, but you will very likely die of this virus. And there's nothing we can do. How are you going to resurrect the economy if you don't have people? So in an organization, your employee is the most important thing. You need to make sure that your employees are safe, that their well-being are taken care of, that when they work off-site, that they have got connectivity, they've got the tools, they've got data. And if they've got that, they will be able to provide a quality service to your customers and to and ensure then the survival of the business, because the productivity will remain and the profitability will remain. But if you don't look after your employees first, there won't be anybody to actually look after your customers, and in respect, there won't be any profitability.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have one of the participants on the line who wants to ask John directly. Desta, over to you.
Sure. Good afternoon. Hi, Lunis. This is Kidist, former trainee of your institution. Anyway, my question regarding brand equity. During this crisis, what are the strategies you think one should apply in evaluating current brand strategy or current brand value, and then and how to transform it post the crisis and making sure that it stays as valuable? So if you have some tips, it would help us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kidist. Nice hearing your voice again, and thanks for locking into the webinar. Yes, I think this whole thing of brand equity is quite an important thing, because we still need to have organizations after all of this. And in 2-3 years' time from now, when we've got a vaccine, we still as organizations needs to continue. And I think from a brand equity perspective, we still need to continue to advertise, but make sure that the advertisements that we place is sensitive, and that we don't chase the money, but that we rather give messages of hope. And that the communication is still there. So we shouldn't stop to advertise. We shouldn't stop to actually put out press releases. We shouldn't stop with a normal way of communicating, because that's how we will remain in the hearts and minds of all our stakeholders. What will happen is that, I mean, there's no clear way to say, okay, but if I do this, the impact will be like this at the end. But you will see that your customers will stick with you, that your clients and your other stakeholders will stick with you throughout this process, because they are loyal to you, because you provided them with valuable insight, you maintain communication, you didn't just go dark on them, and you actually communicated in an effective manner. What is important and that will stand out from others is the way that you communicate. So be sensitive in your messages, be aware of what you say, who you say it to, don't make flippant remarks, don't use humor in your messaging, but rather be hopeful. And I think that is the way, and continue. I think the big thing during this crisis is to continue with your communication. And that's how you can build the brand equity. And I suppose 2-3 years from now, you will actually see the value, because your business will just grow from this pandemic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenis. Any other person, any participant with another question? Well, I think we don't have any question here. I believe that it's been an exciting time for all of us from various parts of the world listening to you today. Thank you so much for such an insight that you shared with us. And at this point in time, I would like to hand over to our host, the CEO of ABMC, Joseph, as he takes us through the rounding up session. Thank you, Joseph, over to you.
Thank you, Dixon. Thank you, Lunis. Amazing session. A lot of insights out there. And mine perhaps is to add and say, some of the questions that have been raised, if we are able to sit down with the organizations and come up with a crisis management plan, that way we're able to cover all the segments that have been raised. The loopholes which we might not foresee, we'll be able to cover them when it comes to meeting our end of day to day business, which is the bottom line. We're able to ensure that is actually covered within the crisis management plan. So quite informative, and it's a learning curve, and it's good that we're able to have these sessions. And as ABMC, we'll continue to provide these kind of forums where we can be able to share insights and give knowledge on how best to manage during this particular crisis. The presentation will be shared on email to all the participants who participated today. We encourage you to share as many as possible to your participants or colleagues or peers out there. We'll have another session, God willing, in the coming week, and we'll be able to share more ideas in terms of how best to be able to cover. So for me as ABMC is to say thank you. We have so many opportunities within our platform. If you log into our website, we'll be able to see available e-learning solutions that we're giving. Currently, we have over, I think, 8 free courses, which you can be able to keep yourself busy and also gain knowledge at this particular time that you have the opportunity. And it's our own way of contributing back and also being relevant, brand positioning, as Lunis was mentioning, and also to ensure that you as our client be able to give you something that is of importance in terms of this crisis and be able to manage through. So with those few remarks, thank you so much for joining us on board.